The orange cat waited at the bus stop every afternoon, until the old lady finally got off. Havenwood, West Virginia, was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where the pace of life was dictated by the changing seasons and the gentle rhythm of the Appalachian Mountains. Nestled in a valley, surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests, it was a village of close-knit families, generations-old traditions, and a shared sense of belonging. Everyone knew everyone else, and news, both good and bad, traveled faster than the meandering creek that flowed through the town center. The heart of Havenwood was its small, brick bus stop, a simple shelter with a worn wooden bench and a faded sign announcing the daily arrival and departure of the Mountain Line bus. It was here every afternoon that the orange cat could be found. He wasn't a stray, not exactly. He was too well-fed, too comfortable around people to be truly feral. But he wasn't owned either, not in the traditional sense. He roamed freely, accepting scraps of food and pats on the head from the villagers, but he kept his distance, his amber eyes holding a watchful, almost melancholic gaze. He'd appear at the bus stop around 3 p.m., just before the afternoon bus from Charleston was due. He'd settle himself on the bench, or sometimes on the low stone wall surrounding the small patch of grass beside the shelter, and he'd wait. He'd watch the passengers disembark, his tail twitching slowly, his gaze scanning each face with an intensity that was both curious and strangely poignant. The bus driver, a burly man named Earl, was the first to notice the cat's consistent presence. "He's been there every day for months," he told Mrs. Gable, the owner of the Havenwood General Store, which sat directly across from the bus stop. "Don't know what he's waiting for. Breaks my heart. It does." Mrs. Gable, a stout, silver-haired woman who knew everything about everyone in Havenwood, had her own theories. "He's waiting for someone," she declared, nodding sagely. "Someone who got on that bus and never came back. Cats are like that, you know. Loyal creatures. More loyal than some people, I'd say." Other villagers offered their own speculations. Some thought he was waiting for a child who had moved away. Others believed he was simply enjoying the afternoon sun. But no one knew the truth, and the orange cat at the bus stop became a familiar, if somewhat mysterious, fixture of Havenwood life. He was a silent observer, a patient waiter, a furry enigma in a town where secrets were rare and stories were shared freely. He created a small sense of wonder. Eleanor Preston sat by the window of her small, cramped apartment in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, staring out at the gray cityscape. The buildings loomed, tall and impersonal, blocking out the sky, a stark contrast to the open vistas she'd once known. She was 81 years old, her body frail, her spirit weary, but her mind was sharp, filled with memories that were both a comfort and a torment. 3 years. It had been 3 years since she'd left Havenwood, the only home she'd ever truly known. 3 years since she'd said goodbye to the life she'd built, the friends she'd cherished, and the little orange cat she'd loved. Her life in Havenwood had been a tapestry woven with simple joys and enduring love. She'd married Thomas, her childhood sweetheart, in the small white church on the hill. They'd bought a modest house on the edge of town, a cozy cottage with a wraparound porch and a garden that bloomed with riotous color every spring. Thomas had worked at the local lumber mill, and Eleanor had kept house, tending to her garden, volunteering at the library, and filling their home with warmth and laughter. And then there was MIT. He'd arrived as a tiny, mewling kitten, a ball of orange fluff abandoned near their back porch. Eleanor had taken him in, nursed him back to health, and named him MIT, short for Mittens, because of his playful habit of batting at everything with his paws. He'd grown into a handsome, affectionate cat, a constant companion who followed her around the house, curled up on her lap in the evenings, and greeted her at the door every time she returned home. But life, as it often does, had dealt them a cruel blow. Thomas had been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. He'd fought bravely, but the disease had ravaged his body, leaving him weak and frail. Eleanor had cared for him tirelessly, her love unwavering, but in the end, she'd lost him. The grief had been overwhelming, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate her. And then the financial burden had hit. Thomas's medical bills had depleted their savings, and Eleanor, with no income of her own, had struggled to make ends meet. Her daughter, Sarah, who lived in Pittsburgh, had urged her to move closer. It made sense, Sarah had argued. She could help her mother financially, and Eleanor wouldn't be so alone. The decision had been agonizing. Leaving Havenwood felt like tearing out a piece of her heart. But the hardest part, the most heartbreaking part, had been leaving MIT behind. She couldn't take him to the small city apartment where pets weren't allowed. She tried to find him a home, asking neighbors, posting flyers, but no one had been able to take him in. In the end, she'd left him with a large bag of food and a heavy heart, hoping that someone in the village would take pity on him. She'd whispered a tearful goodbye, promising him that she'd come back for him someday, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Now, 3 years later, sitting in her lonely apartment, surrounded by the noise and anonymity of the city, Eleanor felt a growing sense of regret, a persistent, nagging guilt that gnawed at her conscience. She missed Havenwood, she missed her friends, and she missed MIT terribly. A sudden, impulsive decision seized her. She would go back, just for a visit. She needed to see her old home, to reconnect with her past, and to find out what had happened to her beloved cat. She picked up a small, faded photograph from her bedside table, a picture of MIT, a playful kitten with bright orange fur and mischievous green eyes. She clutched it tightly, a talisman of hope and a reminder of the love she'd left behind. The bus ride from Pittsburgh to Havenwood was long and arduous, a journey that stretched over several hours and countless miles. Eleanor, her body stiff and achy from the cramped seating, found herself lost in a sea of memories. The landscape outside the window, initially urban and industrial, gradually transformed into rolling hills, verdant forests, and picturesque farmland. As the bus rumbled along, Eleanor's mind drifted back to her life in Havenwood. She remembered the crisp mountain air, the scent of pine needles and wildflowers, the sound of birdsong in the mornings. She recalled the friendly faces of her neighbors, the potluck suppers at the church, the quiet evenings spent on her porch swing with Thomas and MIT. She contrasted those memories with her life in the city. The constant noise, the crowded streets, the impersonal interactions with strangers. She tried to adapt, to make the best of it, but she'd never felt at home there. She'd felt like a stranger in a strange land, disconnected from everything she held dear. She'd joined a senior center, hoping to make friends, but the connections had felt superficial, lacking the deep roots of her Havenwood friendships. She'd volunteered at a local library, seeking solace in the familiar comfort of books, but it wasn't the same as tending to her own little library in the village. She tried to keep in touch with her old neighbors, writing letters and making occasional phone calls, but the distance had created a growing gap, a sense of separation that she couldn't bridge. She felt increasingly isolated, a lone island in a sea of indifference. Eleanor pulled the faded photograph of MIT from her purse. She traced the outline of his tiny face, her finger lingering on his bright green eyes. She wondered if he was still alive, if he remembered her, if he'd found a good home. The thought of him, alone and forgotten, filled her with a pang of guilt and sorrow. As the bus neared Havenwood, a familiar landscape began to unfold. The rolling hills, the dense forests, the winding roads. It was all coming back to her, vivid and real. Her heart began to pound with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. She was eager to see her old home, to reconnect with her past, but she was also afraid of what she might find. The bus driver announced their arrival, his voice echoing through the nearly empty vehicle. Havenwood, West Virginia. Next stop, Havenwood. Eleanor gathered her belongings, her hands trembling slightly. She stepped off the bus, her legs unsteady, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. It was just as she remembered it, a small, peaceful village nestled in the heart of the mountains. And there, sitting patiently at the bus stop, was a flash of orange fur. The Havenwood bus stop was exactly as Eleanor remembered it. The same sturdy brick structure, the same worn wooden bench, the same faded sign proclaiming its name. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet street, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. And there, sitting on the low stone wall beside the shelter, was the orange cat. He was older now, his fur a bit duller, his movements a bit slower, but there was no mistaking him. He sat with a quiet dignity, his tail twitching slowly, his amber eyes fixed on the approaching bus. Eleanor stepped off the bus, her legs feeling weak and shaky. She clutched her small suitcase, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't allowed herself to hope, to believe that he might still be there, but the sight of him filled her with a sudden, overwhelming surge of emotion. The bus driver, Earl, gave her a curious glance as he unloaded her luggage. He'd seen the cat at the bus stop countless times, but he'd never seen anyone react to him like this. Eleanor took a tentative step towards the cat, her eyes scanning his face, searching for a sign of recognition. "MIT?" she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. Is it really you?" The cat's ears perked up at the sound of her voice. He turned his head, his amber eyes widening slightly. He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze intense and unwavering. And then it happened. With a sudden burst of energy, the cat leaped from the wall and ran towards her. He rubbed against her legs, purring loudly, his body trembling with excitement. He circled her feet, weaving in and out, his tail held high, his entire being radiating a joy that was unmistakable. Eleanor knelt down, tears streaming down her face. She reached out her hand, her fingers trembling as she touched his soft fur. "Oh, MIT," she sobbed, her voice choked with emotion. "It is you. You remember me." She buried her face in his fur, inhaling the familiar scent of him, feeling the comforting vibration of his purr against her cheek. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a reunion that transcended time and distance, a testament to the enduring bond between a woman and her cat. The bus driver, his gruff exterior melting away, watched the scene with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He'd seen a lot of things in his years driving the Mountain Line bus, but he'd never seen anything quite like this. A few other villagers, drawn by the commotion, gathered around, their faces reflecting a similar sense of wonder. The quiet afternoon in Havenwood had been transformed into something extraordinary, something magical. The small crowd that had gathered at the bus stop watched Eleanor and the orange cat with a mixture of curiosity and astonishment. Earl, the bus driver, stood beside Eleanor's suitcase, shaking his head in disbelief. He'd seen the cat waiting at the bus stop for years, but he'd never imagined this. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, scratching his head. That old cat was waiting for someone after all. Mrs. Gable, the owner of the general store, pushed her way through the small group, her eyes wide with surprise. She recognized Eleanor instantly, despite the years that had passed. "Eleanor Preston?" she exclaimed. "Is that really you? And is that MIT?" Eleanor looked up, wiping the tears from her eyes. She managed a weak smile. "It's me, Mrs. Gable," she said, her voice still trembling with emotion. "And yes, this is MIT. I can't believe he remembers me." Mrs. Gable knelt down, peering at the cat. "Well, I'll be darned," she said. "I remember MIT. You and Thomas were mighty fond of him. But it's been 3 years, Eleanor. Cats don't usually remember that long, do they?" Doubt was etched on her face, and on the faces of the other villagers who had gathered around. They knew cats were loyal, but this seemed almost impossible. Eleanor understood their skepticism. It did seem unbelievable, but she knew with a certainty that went beyond logic that this was her MIT. "He remembers me," she insisted, her voice gaining strength. "Look at him. He wouldn't be acting like this if he didn't." MIT, as if to confirm her words, continued to rub against her legs, purring loudly, his tail waving back and forth like a furry metronome. He looked up at her with an expression of pure adoration, his amber eyes shining with affection. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out the faded photograph, the one she'd carried with her throughout her journey. She held it out for Mrs. Gable to see. "This is MIT," she said, pointing to the picture. "He was just a kitten then, but look at his ear. See that little notch on the top?" Mrs. Gable took the photograph, her eyes squinting as she examined it closely. She then looked at the cat, comparing the image to the real thing. She noticed the small, almost imperceptible notch on the top of his right ear, a tiny imperfection that matched the photograph perfectly. A gasp escaped her lips. "Well, she repeated, this time with a tone of genuine amazement. "It is him. It's really him." The other villagers, crowding around, looked at the photograph and then at the cat, their doubts slowly melting away. They saw the distinctive marking. They saw the undeniable bond between Eleanor and the cat, and they began to believe. The news of the reunion spread through Havenwood like wildfire. People whispered about it in the general store, on their porches, and at the church. The story of the orange cat who had waited at the bus stop for 3 years, faithfully awaiting the return of his beloved owner, became an instant legend, a testament to the enduring power of love and loyalty. The unbelievable had become undeniable. With MIT trotting faithfully at her heels, Eleanor walked the familiar path towards her old house. The distance wasn't far, just a few blocks from the bus stop, but each step felt like a journey through time, a return to a life she'd thought she'd lost forever. The air was filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, the sounds of birdsong and the gentle rustling of leaves. The village was just as she remembered it, quiet, peaceful, and achingly familiar. As she approached her house, a wave of emotion washed over her. The small, white cottage with its wraparound porch stood nestled amongst a grove of trees, its paint peeling slightly, its shutters hanging at a slightly crooked angle. It was clear that no one had lived there for quite some time. The garden, once her pride and joy, was a riot of overgrown weeds and wildflowers. The rose bushes, once meticulously pruned, were now a tangled mess of thorns and blossoms. The flower beds, once bursting with color, were choked with weeds, their vibrant hues replaced by a sea of green. But despite the neglect, the house still held a sense of warmth, a sense of homecoming. It was as if it had been waiting for her, patiently enduring the passage of time, holding onto the memories of the life that had once flourished within its walls. MIT, seemingly unfazed by the overgrown garden, explored his surroundings with a familiar confidence. He rubbed against the porch posts, sniffed at the overgrown rose bushes, and chased butterflies through the tall grass. He seemed to recognize his old home, his body language radiating a sense of contentment and belonging. Eleanor watched him, a bittersweet smile on her face. She was overjoyed to be back, to be reunited with her cat and her home, but the sight of the neglected house also filled her with a pang of sadness. It was a stark reminder of the time that had passed, the life that had been interrupted, the husband she had lost. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key, the same key she'd used for over 50 years. It felt heavy in her hand, a tangible link to her past. She inserted it into the lock, the familiar click echoing in the quiet afternoon air. The door creaked open, revealing the interior of the house. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the windows. The air was stale and musty, carrying the scent of old wood and faded memories. Furniture was covered in sheets. The rooms were silent. Only a ticking clock was heard. Eleanor stepped inside, MIT following close behind. She walked through the familiar rooms, her hand trailing along the dusty surfaces, her eyes taking in every detail. She found small, poignant reminders of her past life. A framed photograph of her and Thomas on their wedding day, a half-finished knitting project lying on the armrest of her favorite chair, a dried bouquet of wildflowers still sitting in a vase on the kitchen table. Each object sparked a memory, a bittersweet ache of nostalgia. She felt a profound sense of peace, a sense of coming home, but also a deep sense of loss. The house was filled with ghosts, with echoes of laughter and love, with the lingering presence of the man she had shared her life with. She was home, but it was a home filled with both joy and sorrow, a home that would never be quite the same. Word of Eleanor's return and her miraculous reunion with MIT spread through Havenwood like wildfire. The villagers, initially skeptical, were now captivated by the story, their hearts touched by the enduring bond between the woman and her cat. The next morning, as Eleanor was attempting to clear some of the overgrown weeds from her front yard, she heard a familiar voice. "Eleanor? Is that really you?" She looked up to see Mrs. Gable, the owner of the general store, standing at the edge of her property, a basket of freshly baked muffins in her hand. "Mrs. Gable," Eleanor exclaimed, a warm smile spreading across her face. "It's so good to see you." Mrs. Gable hurried over, her face beaming. "We were all so surprised to hear you were back," she said. "And that story about MIT, well, it's just the most amazing thing I've ever heard." She handed Eleanor the basket of muffins. "Welcome home, dear," she said. "We've missed you." Over the next few days, Eleanor was inundated with visitors. Old friends and neighbors stopped by to welcome her back, to share stories, and to offer their help. They brought casseroles, pies, and flowers, their gestures of kindness a testament to the strong sense of community that defined Havenwood. They reminisce about old times, about Thomas, about the life Eleanor had built in the village. They expressed their regret that she had had to leave, and their admiration for MIT's unwavering loyalty. "He waited for you, Eleanor," Mrs. Gable said one afternoon, as they sat on the porch swing, sipping tea. "That cat never gave up hope. It just goes to show you, the bond between a person and their pet is something special." Eleanor nodded, her eyes misty with tears. "I know," she said. "I feel so blessed to have him back." The community rallied around her, offering to help her clean up the house and garden. Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson from the cat shelter story's husband, a coincidence of name only. This is a different Mr. Henderson, a retired carpenter, volunteered to repair the sagging porch steps. Young Sarah, a teenager from down the street who reminded Eleanor of her own daughter at that age, offered to mow the lawn and weed the flower beds. Others brought tools, cleaning supplies, and their own strong backs, eager to help Eleanor restore her home to its former glory. As Eleanor worked alongside her neighbors, she felt a sense of belonging, a sense of coming home that she had lost during her years in the city. She realized that she had never truly been alone, that the bonds of community, forged over decades, had remained strong, waiting for her to return. She was back where she belonged, surrounded by people who cared, and with her loyal cat by her side. A few days after Eleanor's return to Havenwood, her daughter, Sarah, arrived from Pittsburgh. Sarah, a driven and pragmatic businesswoman in her early 40s, had always been somewhat detached from her mother's emotional attachment to the small town. She'd urged her mother to move to the city, believing it was the best thing for her, and she'd never fully understood Eleanor's longing for her past life. When Eleanor had called her, excitedly recounting the story of her reunion with MIT, Sarah had been skeptical. She'd dismissed it as a coincidence, a case of mistaken identity. Cats, she'd argued, didn't have that kind of memory or loyalty. But she'd also sensed a change in her mother's voice, a newfound spark of happiness that she hadn't heard in years. So, she decided to drive down to Havenwood, partly out of concern, partly out of curiosity. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon, parking her sleek, modern car in front of Eleanor's quaint, slightly ramshackle cottage. The contrast between her city life and her mother's rural existence was stark. Eleanor greeted her at the door, her face beaming, MIT weaving around her legs. Sarah, despite her initial skepticism, couldn't help but smile at the sight. Her mother looked younger, healthier, more vibrant than she had in years. "Mom, you look amazing," she said, hugging her tightly. "I feel amazing," Eleanor replied, her eyes sparkling. "It's so good to be home." Sarah stepped inside, taking in the changes that had already taken place. The house was cleaner, brighter, the air filled with the scent of freshly baked bread. MIT, the infamous orange cat, strolled over to her, rubbing against her legs with surprising friendliness. Sarah, a self-professed dog person, found herself instinctively reaching down to pet him. "So, this is the famous MIT," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Eleanor recounted the story of the bus stop reunion, her voice filled with emotion. She showed Sarah the faded photograph of MIT as a kitten, pointing out the distinctive notch on his ear. Sarah listened patiently, observing the undeniable bond between her mother and the cat. She saw the way Eleanor's eyes lit up when she talked about MIT, the way the cat followed her around the house, the way they seemed to communicate without words. She also saw the changes in her mother. The loneliness and isolation that had characterized her city life had vanished, replaced by a sense of peace and belonging. She was surrounded by friends, supported by a caring community, and reunited with a beloved pet. That evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah finally understood. "I get it, Mom," she said softly. "I understand why you wanted to come back." Eleanor smiled, her hand resting on MIT's soft fur. "It's good to be home," she said. Sarah realized that her mother had never truly belonged in the city. Her heart had always been in Havenwood, with her memories, her friends, and her cat. And now, finally, she was where she was meant to be. The emotional distance between mother and daughter, built up over years of different priorities and lifestyles, began to crumble, replaced by a newfound understanding and appreciation. Eleanor's decision to stay in Havenwood was met with unanimous approval from the community. They had welcomed her back with open arms, and now they rallied around her, offering their support and assistance in any way they could. She sold her small, cramped apartment in Pittsburgh, the sale handled efficiently by Sarah, who, despite her initial skepticism, was now fully supportive of her mother's decision. The proceeds from the sale, along with Eleanor's modest savings, were enough to begin the much-needed renovations on her old house. Mr. Henderson, the retired carpenter, took charge of the structural repairs. He replaced the rotting porch steps, reinforced the sagging floorboards, and fixed the leaky roof. He worked with a quiet efficiency, his skilled hands transforming the dilapidated cottage into a safe and comfortable home once more. Mrs. Gable, along with a group of other women from the village, tackled the interior. They cleaned, scrubbed, and painted, transforming the dusty, neglected rooms into bright and welcoming spaces. They unearthed old treasures from the attic, polished forgotten silverware, and filled the house with the scent of lemon oil and lavender. Sarah, during her weekend visits, helped with the decorating, adding modern touches while preserving the house's original charm. She brought new curtains, comfortable furniture, and a few carefully chosen pieces of art, creating a space that was both stylish and cozy. MIT, of course, supervised the entire operation, his orange fur a constant presence amidst the flurry of activity. He'd curl up on the porch swing, watching the comings and goings with a regal air, or he'd weave through the legs of the workers, offering a soft purr of encouragement. Eleanor, meanwhile, focused on restoring her beloved garden. With the help of young Sarah from down the street, she cleared away the weeds, tilled the soil, and planted new flowers. She chose varieties that reminded her of Thomas, his favorite roses, his beloved lilies, the fragrant lavender that he'd always said reminded him of her. As the garden began to bloom, so too did Eleanor's spirit. She found solace in the familiar rhythm of tending to the plants, her hands connecting with the earth, her heart filled with a sense of peace and purpose. She was rebuilding her life one flower, one board, one brushstroke at a time. She reconnected with old hobbies, taking up knitting again, joining the local book club, and even volunteering at the library, just as she had done years before. She was no longer the lonely, isolated woman she had been in the city. She was surrounded by friends, supported by a loving community, and reunited with her faithful companion, MIT. She had found her way back to happiness, to a place where she truly belonged. A year passed, and the transformation of Eleanor's house and garden was complete. The once neglected cottage was now a charming, welcoming home, its white paint gleaming in the sunlight, its porch adorned with colorful hanging baskets. The garden was a riot of color, a testament to Eleanor's dedication and the enduring power of nature. But it was the wildflowers that truly captured the essence of Eleanor's journey. They had sprung up unexpectedly, from seeds that had lain dormant in the neglected soil, waiting for the right moment to bloom. They were a mix of colors and shapes, a vibrant tapestry of purples, yellows, pinks, and whites, a symbol of resilience, renewal, and the beauty that can emerge from loss. One warm afternoon, Eleanor sat on the porch swing, MIT curled up on her lap, his soft fur warm against her skin. The garden was alive with the buzz of bees and the flutter of butterflies. The air was filled with the sweet scent of honeysuckle and roses. She looked out at the wildflowers, their delicate petals swaying gently in the breeze. She thought about her life, about the journey that had brought her back to this place, to this moment. She thought about Thomas, her beloved husband, and the life they had shared in this house. She thought about the years she had spent in the city, feeling lost and alone. And she thought about MIT, her faithful companion, who had waited for her, patiently and loyally, at the bus stop. She realized that the wildflowers were a metaphor for her own life. Like the seeds that had lain dormant in the soil, she too had endured a period of darkness, of neglect, of loss. But like the wildflowers, she had found the strength to bloom again, to find beauty and joy in the midst of adversity. She had returned to Havenwood, not to recapture the past, but to create a new future, one that honored her memories while embracing the present. She had found a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper connection to her community, and a profound appreciation for the simple gifts of life. Sarah visited often, bringing her own children to play in the garden, and they would talk for hours. Eleanor knew she'd never fully escape sadness of her loss, but she had finally made peace with it. Years flown by like the gentle creek that meandered through Havenwood. Eleanor lived a long and fulfilling life in her restored cottage, surrounded by the love of her community and the unwavering companionship of MIT. She became a beloved figure in the village, known for her kindness, her resilience, and her remarkable story. Eventually, time took its toll. Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep, in the same bed she had shared with Thomas, with MIT curled up at her feet. Her passing was mourned by the entire village, but it was also celebrated as a life well lived, a testament to the enduring power of love and loyalty. Sarah, who had initially been skeptical of her mother's attachment to Havenwood, inherited the cottage. She had grown to understand and appreciate her mother's deep connection to the village, and she decided to keep the house, using it as a weekend retreat for her own family. MIT, now a very old cat, his orange fur faded and his movements slow, continued to live at the house, cared for by Sarah and her children. He seemed to understand that Eleanor was gone, but he remained content, basking in the sunbeams on the porch, exploring the familiar garden, and accepting the affections of a new generation. The story of Eleanor and MIT became a local legend, a tale passed down through generations. It was a story of enduring love, of unwavering loyalty, and of the unbreakable bond between a woman and her cat. It was a story that reminded people of the importance of community, the power of forgiveness, and the beauty that can be found in the simplest of things. The wildflowers continued to bloom in Eleanor's garden, year after year, a vibrant reminder of her resilience and her spirit. And sometimes, on a quiet afternoon, a new visitor might spot an old, orange cat sitting patiently by the garden gate, as if waiting for someone, a silent guardian of a legacy of love and memory. The cat, a symbol of the enduring connection between Eleanor and her beloved Havenwood, a reminder that even after loss, life, like the wildflowers, finds a way to bloom again. The children of Havenwood, they knew the story of Eleanor and MIT, and loved the old orange cat as an embodiment of that special bond.